fundamentalists about something. Most of us are fundamentalists about fundamentalism. We think we are either fundamentally against it or fundamentally for it. But contrary to what some of us may think, fundamentalism isn't the private domain of one group of people. Fundamentalists can be found in all walks of life. In thinking about this, our youngest daughter is a runner who goes out at 5 a.m. on a dark, blustery, blizzardy morning in Ohio. She is a fundamentalist about her running regimen, which has enabled her to complete the Boston Marathon 11 years in a row. My brother-in-law, Jennifer's brother, has a workshop that looks like a display ad for Home Depot. He is fundamentalist about the location and each and every one of his tools in that area. Then there's a 6-year-old who makes his parents pick off every single one of those tiny, dehydrated onion squares from his Happy Meal burger. He is a fundamentalist about his food. Then there's the office manager whose weekly staff meetings always take some form, no matter what crisis is surging through the office, or who insists that everything takes place according to a plan, an agenda that follows Robert's Rules of Order, also known as the Order of St. Robert. He is a procedural fundamentalist. The strict party liners who would never consider working or voting for a candidate who is not designated by their party are political fundamentalists. The parents who insist that their children must be instructed in the 3 R's and nothing else, we can call them educational fundamentalists. There are Monday night football fundamentalists. There are toilet paper rolls under, toilet paper rolls over fundamentalists. There are no nuts in fudge fundamentalists. Christmas presents open on Christmas Eve fundamentalists. And no white shoes after Labor Day fundamentalists. And even within the domain of religious fundamentalism, there are many varieties. So if you think your church is flexible and receptive to new ideas, try suddenly changing the prescribed Sunday morning order of worship. It will suddenly become apparent that even within the most liberal congregations, we tend to develop liturgical fundamentalism. Oh, and then try reading from the Women's Bible, or one of the newest versions, which incidentally I read from the Amplified version of the Bible. So think about that. When you start messing around with things, the one thing that you never, ever, ever want to mess around with is church music. This is a lifelong learning recitation. Well, the point of all of that is that all of us are fundamentalists about something. We all choose to erect certain functional pillars that we use to support the weight of attitudes and actions that are called for in our lives. Being a fundamentalist about some things can strengthen our centeredness and build up a sense of security for the adaptability that is required of the disciples of Jesus. In my early days, my mother insisted that my bed be made before I came to breakfast. And as much as I regarded that as unnecessary, it has served me well during the years. Fundamentalism only becomes a problem when the rocks of certainty that we have placed in our lives spread their stoniness to the depth of our souls or harden to the point of immovability, the compassion of our hearts. And Mark's gospel today pinpoints the problem. Even as he is moved to compassion by the sight of a man with a withered hand, Jesus is moved to anger as he detects the hardness of heart shared by those who are watching him. Jesus and the bystanders in the synagogue that day were butting head on into each other's fundamentalism. For the Pharisees, abiding by the strict letter of the law concerning the correct Sabbath observance was fundamentalism that was shaping their attitude. Like the Pharisees, these synagogue observers believed that safeguarding the Sabbath observant, was much more important than this individual situation with the man with the withered hand. And that's what they found themselves confronting. But in both of these cases, Jesus also acts as a fundamentalist. He acts it here as everywhere else in the gospel narrative. Jesus' actions and attitudes are defined by his fundamentalism of love. Jesus is a love fundamentalist. In everything he did, in everything he said, Jesus acted out this love fundamentalism. It was love fundamentalism that urged Jesus to heal the man's withered hand, even on the Sabbath. It was love fundamentalism that kept Jesus from Satan's temptations in the wilderness. It was love fundamentalism that spurred Jesus to sweep the children up into his arms. It was love fundamentalism that drove Jesus to choose humiliation over political power. It was love fundamentalism that revealed Jesus' glorification through self-sacrifice. Douglas John Hall of Canada's McGill University says that, quote, "The law requires us to tolerate one another, but the law of Christ makes tolerance not enough. It may be good enough legally and politically for the pluralistic society that we live in, but it is not good enough for the one who did not say, tolerate your neighbor, but love your neighbor." And the great thing about being a love fundamentalist is that the more strictly you abide by your fundamentalism, the greater freedom you enjoy. Instead of narrowing your vision, limiting your options, and scaling down your domain of scope, love fundamentalism opens up a whole new world of possibilities and promises. The fundamentalism of love offers one more chance. One more chance. Because fundamentalism of love always goes one more mile. Always trusts one more time. Always believes one more possibility. Always commits one more hour. Always cries one more tear. Always rejoices over one more soul. Always goes one more mile. But like all fundamentalisms, love fundamentalism also depends on rigorous commitment, perpetual practice, and unwavering obedience in order for it to truly define the depth and direction of our lives. If something is not woven into the very woof and warp of our lives, it is not fundamental. And Jesus chose to weave the thread of love through every aspect of his existence. The very fiber of his soul was knit together with this love. In his book, Scott Colgazer tells the story of Victoria Ingram Curley. She was a bride-to-be. And like most bride-to-bes, she was picking out her beautiful white wedding dress, getting the invitations out to friends, making plans for the reception and the honeymoon. A few months before her wedding, however, she learned that her fiancé was very ill. He would die unless he had a kidney transplant. So donors were sought, but none was suitable. Finally, Victoria asked, well, what about me? Could I give him one kidney? So tests were made, and remarkably, she was the perfect donor. So the wedding was postponed, and a surgery was scheduled instead. And then when asked by the press why she would go through all of this prior to being married, her answer? Perfectly simple. This is what love is. This is what relationships are all about. She and her husband were married, and they are love fundamentalists. And this is what our life as disciples is all about. Living a faith that makes sense fundamentally. Jesus is the icon of love. God in the flesh. God incarnate. God who went to the cross to show a fundamental depth of love by the creator of all. The creator of all creation and all humanity. Sisters and brothers, we live in a world where divisiveness is rampant. Distrust is apparent. Negativism pervades our discourse. Differences are intolerable. Yet we who confess Jesus as Lord of our lives, we are called to be love fundamentalists. Often not likable, but always loved. Fundamentally loved by a God who is love. Can we value our differences and love unconditionally? Can we be love fundamentalists? That is our calling. To love in spite of our flaws and our failings. To love others in spite of their flaws and failings. We are called to see our differences as a gift of God and to value them in fundamental love. Thanks be to God for his fundamental, unconditional, always forgiving love that each one of us share. Oh, and one final thought. When asked what is the greatest commandment, meaning the greatest of the 10, Jesus answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. There it is. Love fundamentalism. Love God, love others. It is that simple. Thanks be to God.